My name's Steve. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And so Andy wants to hear like a really good meeting. And my response to that is I took the dog for a walk today at like 3 o'clock, from like 3 to 4:30, and I went through all steps, 1 through 12 with her, did like the whole step series, and it was great. You should have been there. Because I said all kinds of great things and talked about all kinds of great stuff, and everything I thought about, I'm sure I just forgot about while I was sitting over there for the 10 minutes that everyone was reading. But, I really do. I try not to think about, whenever I'm asked to do this stuff, about really what I'm going to say. I'm convinced that it really doesn't matter what, whatever you're meant to hear, you're going to hear tonight. Whatever God has ordained to go in your ears out of my mouth, Ed's going to hear something completely different than what Paul is going to hear. I think that's just how God works, and so my name's Steve. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My sobriety date is November 23rd of 2006. And, I've always heard it since I got sober, there's a lot of, controversy in AA when someone says they're recovered, ED, past tense. It makes me feel good to say that. I'm proud to be able to sit up here in front of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and say that I'm recovered. I'm not sick. I'm not the person that walked in these doors. In the first step, it says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, past tense. When the men and women wrote that in the first step, they were, a lot of them were sober 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. They had recovered. They weren't drinking, Hence, if I was not recovered, if I was still powerless over alcohol, I would not be here with you guys right now. I'd be at the bar. And not like, the Hacienda would be like one of those holes in the walls over there on Federal next to the crack, hotel is where I'd be at, if I was still powerless over alcohol. But I'm not. I'm not anymore. Because AA has enabled me to tap into a power greater than myself that the second step talks about. That if I persistently do what you guys taught me to do, on a daily basis, just like the big book talks about, I'm not cured. I have a daily reprieve. That if I do certain things, I'll get a certain result. And I believe that. I believe it in my heart. I've experienced it. And I think it would be, my sponsor, when I did the third step with my sponsor, he said that it was a deal between me, him, and God, that if he was to help me, that I would go forth and basically let people know what had happened, to let newcomers and new people trying to get sober know what had happened. And what happened was, as a result of doing what AA taught me to do, I went from a person that could not stay away from alcohol and other mind or mood altering substances to save my own life, to save my mother's life. I could not control it. I could not just put the plug in the jug. I could not just say no, and it had been that way since I started when I was 13 till I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous around age 25. And then even after I came to AA, which I spent a whole hour talking about last week, I couldn't stay away from it. I couldn't stay clean and sober because A, I wasn't willing enough to really listen to what you people had to say. B, I definitely wasn't willing to talk about there being a power greater than myself, because no matter how bad my life had gotten, I was always the power greater than everybody else. My thinking, my ideas, my plans, my designs were always better than yours, no matter how bad my life was. And I don't know if anyone else in here's ever experienced that, but I've been in some real jackpots and was able to turn my head to the left and say, look at this schmuck over here. That was just, no pun intended, I'm just saying. That was the way my personality was prior to coming to AA, and it's still that way sometimes. I'm not going to sit up here and say that doesn't happen, because it does. I'm a human being, and I'm also an alcoholic, and I know that the man that walked in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous many years ago, even though he doesn't rear his head the way he used to, he's still there, just under the surface. And I know that. I'm well aware of that. And that's probably the biggest reason that I continue to try to do what Alcoholics Anonymous has asked me to do and stay plugged into this power greater than myself. You know, I mean, yeah, I have a healthy fear of drinking and drugging, but I'm real scared of the guy that came to AA because he can screw his life up real bad without drinking and drugging. I promise you that. And that's where the other steps of Alcoholics Anonymous come into play, which we'll get into more about that as we go through it over the next few weeks. So I brought a bunch of literature with me tonight, and I'm going to read a lot of it. You know, last week I spent the entire hour basically telling you my story. And those of us that are on the Just Not Drinking Club, all they heard was a drunk-a-log. Those of us that are here and have actually went through the big book with the sponsor and worked the steps probably heard what I was echoing, and what I was echoing was I repeatedly tried to stop or was forced to stop for a little while or because the consequences had stopped, but I always went back to it. Whether I knew what was going to happen, whether I wasn't thinking about what was going to happen, whether I said, F it, I don't care what happens, I always return to drinking and drugging no matter what. And the reason that is because I have this disease called alcoholism, which I did not know what it was for many years. Even when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not know what it was. And I can't just blame the people in AA because I'm sure there were some people talking about it. Not a whole lot, but there were a few. But I wasn't listening anyways, probably, because I'm full of myself. I'm self-centered. I'm egotistical. I think I know everything. I don't think drinking's the real problem. I mean, it's a problem, but I'm sure that, you know, the jails, the institutions, the creditors, the women, my family, you know, there's all kinds of other reasons that's the real problem, not me. And so I want to read something out of the 12 and 12 real quick. And then we're going to go back and I'm going to go into talking about what I ended talking about last week. So the last page of the 12 and 12 at step 2, it says, "Few indeed are the practicing alcoholics who have any idea how irrational they are, or seeing their irrationality can bear to face it. Some will be willing to term themselves problem drinkers, but cannot endure the suggestion that they are in fact mentally ill. They are abetted in this blindness by a world which does not understand the difference between sane drinking and alcoholism. Sanity is defined as soundness of mind, yet no alcoholic, soberly analyzing his destructive behavior, whether destruction fell on the dining room furniture or on his own moral fiber, can claim soundness of mind for himself. Therefore, step 2 is the rallying point for us all, whether agnostic, atheist, or former believer. We can stand together on this step. True humility and an open mind can lead us to faith, and in every AA meeting is an assurance that God will restore us to sanity if we rightly relate ourselves to Him." And I really like that. I really like that. You know, Dr. Silkworth, and all through more about alcoholism, and all through There's a Solution in the big book, there's repeated stories, repeated stuff, which I'm going to read a little bit in a minute, where it talks about, it refers to me being insane. In the second step, it says, "I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, or restore us to sanity." So if something is going to be restored to sanity, it has to be insane. And for me, that was one of the real catalysts that made me really want to buy into what Alcoholics Anonymous had to offer when I started reading the big book and going through the steps with my sponsor. You know, so what happened was, you know, like I wasted the entire hour last week. I kept telling you about all these attempts to stop drinking, and finally I get tricked into going to my first AA meeting down here in Florida. I stay sober for however long it was, 8, 9, 10 months. I can't even remember, it was so long ago, but it was more than 6 months. It was the longest time I had stayed clean and sober since I was probably about 13. I think I might have got right around the same amount of time in jail one time, which I told that story, and I swore I was going to stay sober and didn't. And here I am. I'm in AA. It's 2004. I spend the summer I'm going to meetings like they're going out of style. 3, 4 meetings a day. I'm drinking 20 cups of coffee a day. I'm chasing the women around here. I got a tan. You know, my life was really good for the first time in a long time, to be honest with you. Now, I didn't have a lot of money, but I'm down in South Florida. It's the middle of the summer, and I have a little bit of clarity of mind. I'm not drinking. I'm not drugging. And I'm starting to piece together a little bit of a life down here. I have some friends in recovery I really like, you know, and what happened was, I want to say right around that 6th or 7th month mark, I heard Sarah mention this the other day, and so I guess I didn't make it up. Maybe she did, and I heard her say it a long time ago. But what I like to refer to it as is that, have you ever had like an itch in the middle of your back, like right in the middle, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't reach it. Like, and you like, damn, why don't I have one of those 2-foot hand scratcher things around? And of course you don't. And you do everything you can to try to scratch it. So right around that 6th or 7th month point of going to meetings, drinking coffee, listening to Yaja ramble on all the time, that itch started. And what that itch was, and I didn't know, was I needed to take a drink. That's what it was. Deep down inside, the spring was tightening, and it was tightening, and it was tightening. And over the next few weeks, I started to get a little bit more irritable, a little bit more restless, and a little bit more discontented, to where I couldn't sit in the meetings no more. I started to hate everybody a little bit more in the meetings. And I didn't know what was wrong with me, And I was looking for anything to make me feel better. Going to the beach. I think I bought a motorcycle, if I remember right. Like, I was searching for anything, buying clothes, anything to make me feel better about myself. Everything that I could try to pile on the outside, none of it was working. And that itch kept getting worse. It kept getting worse. It kept getting worse. And finally, one morning, I decided, I'm going to go home. I've been in Florida too long. That's the problem. I need to go back to Ohio. Everything, all the problems went away. I've been clean and sober for about 9-10 months now. I'm going to be okay. I was making too big of a deal of a simple problem. I just won't drink and get high. I'm going to go back home, get a job. And that's what I did. I got everything lined up, went back home. I got this job. My dad got me this real good job, driving a front-end loader. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but that's besides the point. So anyways, my man gets me this job. I go home. I'm home for about 2 weeks, and I'm hanging out with some guys that I grew up with, one of my guys' wives, and, they're involved in the most ridiculous stuff that if you're in recovery, you should definitely not be around, but I know everything, You can't tell me anything. I'll be just fine. I'm not going to drink. And one night we're at this pool hall, because I love playing pool, and so that was my rationalization for being at a pool hall where everybody is, drinking and shooting dope, and I walk over to get a soda, just like I get my coffee every day when I walk in here. And I walk over and I look back, just like I look at the Perrier thing to get a Perrier, and I see a Heineken cooler. And just like that, my brain says, get a Heineken. And just like that, my mouth said, give me a Heineken. And just like that, I was drunk. After about 10 months of sobriety, or dryness, or whatever you want to call it. And I picked up that Heineken and was off to the races. It was like I had never stopped. And I finally, like I told you guys last week, made this phone call after about 8 or 9 months of 24 hours around the clock drinking and drugging. One morning I get on my knees and I pray. Why? Because I heard you people talking about it in Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard people say things like, when you want God in your life bad enough and you want to get well, He'll be there for you. And so one morning I say this prayer, and the next thing I know, I'm on the phone making this phone call to this guy that I met down here in AA, and he tells me, to bring my stupid butt down here. And I get to his home, and he says to me, Stevie, I really can't help you because you're beyond human aid. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, you need a power greater than yourself in your life, which will solve your problem, which will help you get better. And if you're willing to open up the big book and read it, I'll take you through the steps and you'll get better. He guaranteed me. He guaranteed me that if I followed his direction and did what he asked me to do to the best of my ability, that I would get sober. And he didn't lie to me. So what I did was I started following the directions to a T. And the funny thing about it is I'm going to read something else here in a minute that's just a kicker. I love what it says. And you can ask Biba, anyone here who knows Biba, about me. So when it comes to following directions, well, first we're going to read something real quick. So on page 29 in the big book, see, because I come in here, I can't stop drinking. I can't stay clean. I think I have a problem with God, but when I finally got to this point in my life where I was so broken and so beaten, I had what I came to terms with was, and the big book talks about it, was that the biggest problem I had was playing God. And I like to dress it up as God's not real, religion is BS, whatever. I had all kinds of excuses, but what it boils down to is that I like to play God. I always believed in God. I just didn't realize it until that very moment when I got to this guy's house down here in AA and started reading through the big book that night, that's my problem. That's why I can't stay clean and sober. That's why I can't change my life, is because I can't stop relying on the same person that causes all the goddamn problems to begin with. There's a guy, I'm going to steal this one. I'm pretty sure Russell says it. He says that the level or the quality of thinking that it's going to take you to get out of the problem that you're in has to be of a much better quality and a higher level of the thinking that got you into the problem to begin with. And that's me. That's Steve, untreated alcoholism in a nutshell. The same thinking that gets me into my jackpots, I rely on to get me out of those jackpots. It's insanity. It's pure insanity. So, here's the thing. On page 29 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it tells me, so I've come to this point. I know that I'm powerless over alcohol. I know that if I put it in me, I don't stop. In any form. You give me one, I'm off to the races. I've known that since I was 13. When I first came to you guys, I knew that. I had no issues with that. My issue was that I couldn't control it or not do it. I thought that I had the power of choice whether I was going to drink or not. I thought I made the rules. It was up to Steve if he was going to get drunk or not. And that last run I went on in 2004 to early 2005 smashed that idea for me. It smashed that idea that I am not a normal person. There is something wrong with my mind, because when it comes time to take a drink or not take a drink, I can't decide. I know it's bad for me and I do it anyways. So once I came to that conclusion, I could really buy into what the second step says. And the second step tells me is that I have to find a power greater than myself if I want to solve that problem. And that problem is alcoholism. That's what we fix in AA. I got all kinds of other problems. That's not what AA is for. Now, I know a lot of people don't like hearing that, but it's the truth. AA and alcoholism is the first step, is the inability to leave it alone no matter how great the wish, no matter what the consequences are, and the allergy. That's what alcoholism is. So now that I've determined that I can't do it on my own, I had to face the fact that I need a power greater than myself to be in my life. And then comes the real problem. In my own experience, like I've already been talking about. And what's funny is, after you've been around here for a while, and you sponsor a bunch of guys, and you hang out with a bunch of guys, and you watch guys come and go, and women come and go, is that you go from, like, when you're 1 year sober and 2 years, I had all kinds of opinions then. I've been around here for a while now. I have a lot of experience. So I have an experience out there, I have an experience with my own sobriety in here, and I have my own experience in here trying to do my best to help other alcoholics and other people achieve sobriety. And we are very much alike, all of us, you know. And what my collective experience tells me is that most of us suffer from the same inability to follow simple directions. Simple directions. And it tells us on page 29, you know, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. These are followed by 42 personal experiences. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. So in a nutshell, now that I know what's wrong with me, it's telling me on page 29 that there's clear-cut directions, that if I want to get well, if I want to build this relationship with this power greater than myself, and we're just going to call it God for lack of better terms. You know, if you don't like it, oh well, tough shit, you know. I didn't like a lot of stuff too when I got here. Nobody cared. They didn't care. They said, shut up, this is what we do. You know, and that's what the big book tells me. It says that there's clear-cut directions. Now, here's the problem with that if you're like me. And you can ask Biba, like I already mentioned. She'll tell you. So if I go to Walmart right now and buy like a TV stand, like one of these, you know, something to put my 42-inch flat screen and my surround sound center and everything in, I'm going to spend all this money to get this nice, you know, elaborate thing, you know, that looks perfect. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I got to have it. I got to have it. And I get home, and I move everything out of the way. I open up the box. I dump it out, all in the middle of the living room, and this thing pops out. You know, everyone knows what that thing is, right? In the box. It's an instruction manual, right? And what do? I take it, and I set it up here, and I take the box, and I put it up like this where I can see the picture, and I go to town. I go to town putting that goddamn thing together. See, so I know I'm not the only one. And what happens, though, if you're like me, is when you're finished, it looks great, but there's usually like 2 bolts and a piece of wood left over, or something of that nature, you know. And me, being the great I am, knowing everything, the all-powerful, you know, as soon as Biba says, hey, I cut her off instantly and I say, oh, those are extra, it'll be fine. And it's leaning already. You know, you put the TV in it and it leans a little to the left, and I push it a little bit back to the right. It's going to be all right. It's good. You know, and then 5 months later, the goddamn thing falls apart. Why? Because I didn't follow the instructions. I did not follow the instructions. You know? And for me, that's my experience with life, and especially with Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, when I'm ready, when I really want to get well, there's instructions here. There's perfect instructions for me to follow. This guy from my original home group, Albert, he used to always say, trust the process and buy the whole package. You know, and it's so true. It's so true. You know, whether a sponsor has a different way of using the instructions, I think is irrelevant. I think as long as we stay close to the instructions here and do our best to follow them, we'll get good results out of it. And that's been my experience with it. You know, so now that I come to that, and I know that I really want to talk about, you know, a little bit more, because the second step for me is all about this insanity problem. It really is, you know. When I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, for my first several months around here, you know, the first time before I got sober, before I really got sober and did what you guys asked, you know, I can remember, you know, I would love to tell you about my drunk-a-log, you know. If you wrecked 1 car, I wrecked 3, you know. If you got shot once, I got shot and stabbed, you know. Like, and we hear people in the meetings talk about stuff like this all the time, you know what I mean? But I'm here to tell you that if you took me and my mother right now, okay, my mom is not one of us, but if you took us both right now tonight on a Friday night and gave us both a 12-pack and a couple Xanax bars and then put us in the vehicle, we'd probably both get pulled over and get a DUI, or both, wreck the car into a telephone pole, because that's what happens when you drink a 12-pack and eat a couple Xanax bars. Does it mean you're an alcoholic? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because God forbid that would happen to my mother. She ain't touching it again ever. 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 But Steve, the following morning, as soon as they released me from the drunk tank, guess where I'm going? To the hole in the wall down the street. Whoever's serving liquor at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm there. I'm there. I'm there. Because I have this disease of alcoholism that compels me to drink no matter what. Compels me to put stuff in my problem no matter what. So we're going to read a little bit out of the big book. So no matter what, I'm going to say this every week. No matter what comes out of my mouth, you're not going to say we didn't talk about AA, because I'm going to read a little bit out of the big book. So it says, so I like this Dr. Silkworth, and I love talking about this stuff. The reason God works in mysterious ways, at least in my experience. So since I've been about a year sober, I've been working at a detox, one of the oldest detoxes in the country. It's really a nut ward, but I like to call it, it's a real fancy nut ward is what it is, because that's where we end up at, But this one just happens to be real nice, they give you like filet mignon and stuff like that for lunch. But for sure, it's a nut ward. It's where people like me end up at. They can't stay clean and sober. And in the chapter more about alcoholism, there's 3 stories or 4 stories about to try to get us to relate to the insanity of drinking, And I got in the habit when I was about a year into working at this detox to start to ask the patients, what happened? Tell me about it. Because they were all sober. They were all sober, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So literally, I have had, in the past 11 years, I have had thousands of conversations with people that were sober and drank again. They weren't drinking and kept on drinking. Almost all of them were sober at one point, whether it was 30 days in a treatment center, like I'm saying, at home for a couple years. And I have heard story after story after story. Any story you could think of why it was a good idea to take a drink or pop a pill, I've heard. My dog died. I made a lot of money at work. I had a baby and was happy and went to the bar with my friends. I mean, you name it, I have heard it. And I'm one of these guys, I used to really believe that there was a reason why I drank. I thought it was for sure someone's fault, something, anything. So that's what I love about AA is it really, when I get here, and if I really start reading the big book and working with a sponsor, it just smashes almost every idea I have. It smashes my ego to the core, because the guy that comes to AA is sick. He is a very, very sick man, And so this is what Dr. Silkworth says about that. He says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I drank if it was sunny out. I drank if it was raining out. I drank job or no job. I drank if the girl was gone. If I had 3 girlfriends. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. It just did not matter. But if you would have asked me, I always had some excuse why I drank. It says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. So, I don't know if you can imagine that or if you guys remember, but I remember my life drinking and drugging every day, 24 hours around the clock, doing completely insane stuff, involved in all kinds of nonsense, was completely normal. It was completely rational to me. One time,
one time my mother, I like talking to my mom a lot. She's like my hero. So one time my mom came and bailed me out of jail. And I remember this vividly. We're sitting in her driveway, and she hardly ever, I can only recall like maybe 4 or 5 times where she really, really was pissed and was yelling at me. She usually was like the great enabler, and was like, no matter what, like if I killed someone, she'd have helped me bury him out back while she was yelling at me, But we're sitting in the driveway, and she is screaming at me, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Normal people don't do stuff like this, And I says, Mom, everybody does drugs. Somebody's got to sell them, And she just looks at me. She just looks at me. But this look on her eyes, like, what's wrong with you? And she says to me, God help you. And I remember this is one of the many times I went on my tangents about, what ain't God? Rambling on, because I was so full of my irrational, ridiculous, insane thinking. The ideas in my mind that I believed, I couldn't differentiate the true from the false. I thought my life was completely normal. I thought everybody lived that way. And if they didn't, they were suckers, And then this next part I really like, which I already talked about this. It says, they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. So this doctor, Dr. Silkworth, he worked at this place called Towns Hospital. Towns Hospital was basically just like the place I work at. It was the place to go back in 1920 and 1930. It was like if you had money and could go to a fancy detox or like the best place around, you went to Towns Hospital. And Bill Wilson was a patient there multiple times. So that's why I always relate it to where I work at, because a lot of the patients where I work at, they become patients multiple times, because we're insane, because we can't just not drink. And this doctor, he worked with thousands of people just like me. And that's why Bill Wilson asked him to write this stuff in this book, because the doctor had seen people like us repeatedly come to his hospital and leave there sober. They left sober. They didn't leave with a fifth in their hand. They left sober and they came back drunk later. So the doctor developed this theory that not only did they have an allergy, not only do I have this allergy to alcohol, I also have this mental obsession that's gonna drive me to drink. Unless I have something drastic happen that completely rearranges my nature as a human being, I'm going to drink again. And this is what he tells about it. He says, I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. So they're sober. He's saying these guys are sober. They're at work. They have careers. They're like, brokers on Wall Street. They're like construction guys. They have careers and they're sober. He says they took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. That's that itch. That's that insanity. That's exactly what happened to me. I was here in Alcoholics Anonymous for 9-10 months, and I did not think about drinking and getting high. I didn't. I told you guys, I swear on my mother's life, I was doing good. I felt great. Until about the 6th or 7th month mark. And I started to feel that itch. But I didn't know that that itch I was feeling is exactly what Dr. Silkworth is talking about in the doctor's opinion. And you know the reason I didn't know that? Because I had never read the big book. I didn't want to follow directions. I did not want to take advice from you people, you know. But when I started reading this on day one at my sponsor's house, when I asked him for help and he handed me the big book, I started reading this that night. And I read this. I said, how does this guy in 1930 know what I'm going through in 2006? It's amazing. It's amazing. And for me, I started right away. For me, you know, we talk about this spiritual experience stuff. I started to have, for me, right away that day, when I got to that man's house and I opened up the big book, I started to have these experiences. And I'm going to talk about them a lot over the next few weeks, because for me it was like ground shaking. When I opened up the big book and I started reading, I could not believe how much I identified with it, because I thought for sure I wasn't going to. I didn't want to touch it. I wanted nothing to do with it. And I started reading it, you know, and I could not believe. So he says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is a type of man who is willing to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brands or his environment. There is the type who always believes after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic-depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect, except the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. You know why I love reading this stuff? And I like talking about this stuff in an AA meeting instead of my drunk-a-log most of the time? It's because I know that a good majority of the men and women that are going to be sitting in this room tonight or in AA, if I shared my personal story all the time about what I went through in life, they would immediately say I'm in the wrong place. Because it has nothing to do with what AA has to work on, which is alcoholism. You know, I got all kinds of daddy issues, and I got all kinds of crazy-ass shit that went on in my life prior to coming to AA. You know, but it's got really not a whole lot to do with getting sober. But the big book talks about alcoholism, talks about this physical allergy, this mental obsession that anybody that walks through the door that has been through that ringer right away will understand, will say, hey, wait, yeah, that's what goes on with me. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what color we are. It doesn't matter how much money we have or don't have. Doesn't matter whether you're from Aventura, you know, or from Opelika, you know. It doesn't matter whether you drink, you know, with your pinky up or you drink Old English 40-ounce bottles at the corner store. Alcoholism doesn't care about any of that. But when I come in these doors, my mind does. And my mind likes to take inventory. My mind likes to try to tell me I don't need to be here. My mind likes to tell me I'm not like him. Or I haven't stooped that low, you know. And the big book smashes all that. Doesn't care about that. The big book talks about alcoholism, and that's what I like to talk about. Because in order for me to feel that I need this power greater than myself, I have to have alcoholism. I have to. I don't need it. Why else would I need God in my life unless I have found an obstacle that is so great that I can't mount it on my own, you know? Which there were lots of problems in my life, but when I realized I had this problem, I knew that I needed to have this psychic change or this spiritual awakening that you guys talk about. And so when I got to this man's house, I'm going to tell you about this little conversation that we had. And I'm going to read a little bit more out of the big book. You know, so here I am. I'm at this man's house. I got about I don't know. I think I might have had about 20 hours clean. I drove. I got in my car on November 20th or 21st. I don't remember. I was still out of my mind. And I took off driving from Ohio to Florida, and I get to this man's house down here in Florida. He hands me a big book, and he tells me, we're going to go through the steps. He tells me, Stevie, you can get as well as fast as you want to around here. He said, there's no time frame. Doesn't tell us in the big book you got to wait a year to do anything. He says, we're going to go right through the big book. We're going to work the steps. And so we sit down at his table, and we start talking. And we talk a little bit about the story I just told you guys, And I talk with him about, the itch, about what happened, about how I got irritable, how I got restless, I got discontented. And I decided to go home. I told him how I went home and I got the new job. I got a new car. I got a new apartment. Everything was going great. And I wind up with that Heineken in my hand. Just like that, in the blink of an eye. With no thought process. There was no fight, no nothing. There was no contemplation about what's going to happen. There was no, oh, wait a minute, you were just in Florida for 10 months, because 13 years prior to that you couldn't stay clean and sober, and all this horrible stuff was going on in your life. There was nothing. None of that came into my mind when I picked up that last Heineken. And, and we talked about this stuff. We talked about it at great length, and he made me realize, that exactly what I'm about to read, that, that I had delved into the realm of alcoholism where there's no return through human aid, just like the Big Book talks about. I had gotten to a place in my drinking and drugging where there was no other way out of it other than this spiritual stuff that we talk about in here. And here's what it says, and there's a solution. It says, we know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mentally sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc of an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth, and the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is an obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. Then it goes on to tell us that the tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into the state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. The tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And when we sat down and read that, it was like God slapped me across the face. I knew right then at that moment that I could not control whether I was going to drink or not. I had no idea what had happened. He asked me what happened in the bar that night. I said, I don't know. I can't answer it, And for me, that was where the door was opened. Right after we had this conversation, he asked me, am I willing to go to any lengths? Because there's a step before the steps. You guys know that, right? There's a step before the step. You read it and how it works. And it says, if you are willing to go to any lengths, then you're ready to take these steps. And we had this conversation at his coffee table, and then we got down on our knees and we did a third step prayer together. And I started my fourth step that night. And we're going to talk more about that and more about that over the next few weeks. Like I told you guys when I started last week, steps 1, 2, 3 for me, 1, 2, 3 happened in 20 minutes, literally 20 minutes, a half hour. My first night sober, I was working on my fourth step. My first fourth step had about 15 names on it. And I'm grateful that somebody in AA was here to realize that for someone like me, something had to be done. I needed to take action because I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I couldn't stay clean and sober that way. My sponsor, he used to say when I used to come into meetings, for the first couple months I would walk in the room and he would say, here comes the guy with the hammer. Like we just read, the guy that hits himself over the head with a hammer. And I was pushed into working these steps. I was pushed in to prayer and meditation. Everything that we talk about doing, I kid you not, within a week, my sponsor basically had me doing everything besides making amends. That was the only thing that I had to wait like a month or two to get involved in. But from the beginning, the very beginning, he had me praying. He had me reading, meditation books in the morning and doing all kinds of stuff. And you know what the coolest part about AA is, at least in my experience, is I lived next door to this man for the first few months of my sobriety, and I'd seen him doing it. I seen him doing it. And I wanted what he had. And he would say things to me like, if you want what I have, you'll do what I do. So I would do what he did. And here I am, over 12 years later, still clean and sober. Very, very grateful, very happy, very thankful for the results that I got from Alcoholics Anonymous. And next week, we're going to talk about the third step. We're going to talk about the first step some more. I'm going to talk about the first step every week. You know why? Because Bill Wilson tells us it's the only thing we got to do perfect. The rest of this stuff, in my opinion, is just stuff for us to talk about in meetings all the time. You got to have something to do when you got 10 meetings a day to go to. You just got to make up stuff to talk about. But it's all about the first step. Because if the first step isn't real in my life, I don't need none of this. I don't need any of this. I don't need AA if I'm not powerless over alcohol. I don't need any of this stuff. But being that I'm an alcoholic and I have alcoholism, I need to do all this stuff. There's requirements here. There are musts. We're going to talk about all that stuff too. We're going to smash a lot of the theories that we hear floating around in AA because I like to talk about it because there's stuff I have to do. If you don't have to do it, maybe you're not an alcoholic, but I'm an alcoholic. I need to do things. I have to do stuff. I know Paul has to do stuff. I know Claire has to do stuff. So with that, I'm going to shut up, and thanks for letting me share.